Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to Stig of the Dump. Tonight, Chapter 7 is called Party Manners. It was the Easter holiday. Barney and Lou were doing some painting in the dining room, and Granny had spread out some sheets of newspaper on the table in case they made a mess. Barney had his elbows on the table and was reading the newspaper. "Hey Lou," he suddenly cried. "Look what it says here. It says Bottom's Mammoth Circus. Do you think we can go to it?" "I expect it's an old newspaper," said Lou without looking up from the horse she was drawing. "The circus has probably been and gone a long time ago." "No, Lou, do come and see," begged Barney. "It might not have." Lou came round the table and looked at the advertisement. "World's Greatest Travelling Show," she read. "Golly! Liberty Horses, Rangy and his Elephants, Daring Wild Animal Act." "Yes, but Lou, when is it?" said Barney impatiently. "Wait a minute. Opens at Maidstone, April 17. That's next week. Come on, Barney. Let's ask Granny if we can go." But when they bounded into the drawing room, their grandmother was sitting in a chair talking to a strange lady. This sort of thing was unusual enough in Granny's house. They stood in the doorway, goggling, until their grandmother said, "Come in and say how do you do to Mrs. Forkham Green, children." They came in and they shook hands. "These are my grandchildren, Barney and Lou," explained grandmother to the strange lady. "They're staying with me for part of their holidays." "But how nice for you," cooed Mrs. Forkham Green. "And such bonny children too. I do wish I had known about them. I'm giving a fancy dress party for my little niece on Wednesday. Do you think Barney and Lou would like to come? Most children nowadays seem to hate parties, but I think they're good for them, don't you?" "Ooh, a fancy dress party," exclaimed Lou. "Do let's go, Granny. I'll go as a puma." "And I'll go as a caveman," said Barney. "Granny, can we? And Granny, can we go to the circus too? It's next Monday. Please, Granny, let's." Now, exclaimed Granny. "Circuses and cavemen and pumas, I'm afraid we'll have to see dears." "They do seem keen, the darlings," said Mrs. Forkham Green. "Do bring them if you can. I'm sure they'd look charming as a puma and a caveman. My little niece is going to be a Dresden shepherdess. We got the costume, especially from London, and she looks so sweet in it. It's been so delightful meeting your charming grandchildren. I do hope we shall be meeting them on Wednesday." Mrs. Forkham Green swept out and drove off in a large shiny car, and Granny began to explain the difficulties of making fancy dress costumes with only a day and a half to do it in. Perhaps they could go to the circus instead of the party, but she thought their parents were coming at the weekend to take them home. The children went off rather gloomily. They hadn't the heart to go on painting. Lou curled up with an animal storybook. Barney stood by the window and thought. And then, without a thought, Barney slipped out of the house. When he got into the middle of the back lawn, he stopped and he thought again. He went back to the house, crept upstairs and searched around his bedroom until he found his precious collection of glass marbles. Then he slipped out of the house again and set off for the chalk pit. He was wondering if the plan he had thought of would work, or rather, he hadn't got a plan, he just had a feeling that Stig could help him once more. But it was going to be difficult to explain this time. He was sure that Stig wouldn't understand about fancy dress parties. But Stig had such a lot of things in his den that some of them were bound to come in useful if he could get Stig to part with them. When he got to the den, he found Stig happily peeling an old umbrella somebody had thrown away down the pit. He ripped the cover off and tried it on himself in different ways. By tearing a bigger hole in the middle and climbing into it, he found it made quite a useful sort of skirt. "That's clever, Stig," exclaimed Barney. "It will keep the rain off too." Stig then turned his attention to the frame of the umbrella. He wrenched off the little struts one by one, and then he sat looking at them as they lay in a heap in front of him. Barney could tell he was wondering what he could use them for. He found the first juice without thinking. It was just right for scratching an itch in the middle of his back. He looked at the other one for some time and played with it in his hands. He found that he could stick its two legs into the ground so that the long part reached forward at an angle. Suddenly he reached for a small turnip and stuck it on the end that was in the air. The whole thing wobbled a bit, so he fitted another strut so that there were four legs to hold up the turnip. Then he brought it near the fire so that the turnip was hanging over the hot embers, and there it was, a standing toasting fork or spit. Stig played with another of the pieces of metal and bent it with his strong hands so one of the ends snapped off. So then he had a piece of thin metal with a hole in the end. It was not long before he had rubbed the other end to a point on a rough stone, and then there was a useful big needle. Stig seemed very pleased with all the things he could do with his bits of umbrella. He put the other metal bits aside, broke off the handle, which was carved like a Scotty dog, and stuck that into the wall as a decoration, and put the point of the umbrella against the wall with his weapons. That would make a good arrow. Barney had been fascinated watching Stig inventing uses for the bits of umbrella that he'd almost forgotten what he'd come for. Then he remembered about the fancy dress party. He put his hand in his pocket and he took out a glass marble. "I brought this for you, Stig," he said. Stig took the marble with some interest. He held it up to the light and he grinned and he popped it in his mouth. "No, no!" cried Barney. "It's not for eating. Spit it out, Stig, please." Stig took the marble out of his mouth and looked at Barney questioningly. "It's just for playing with," explained Barney. "Look, here's another." He rolled the second marble along the ground to Stig. Stig looked amused at the way the little glass ball rolled around, flashing in the light. He rolled his marble at Barney's and they struck and bounced apart. He played with both of them for a bit and then he handed them back to Barney. "No, they're for you, Stig," said Barney. "You can keep them." Stig put them carefully in a niche in the wall and then looked around for something to give Barney in exchange. He picked up 2 or 3 of his precious umbrella bones and offered them to Barney, but Barney pushed them away. "No, thank you. I don't think I want bits of umbrella," he said. Stig looked relieved. He didn't really want to part with them. He went to a pile of metal things and came back with a brass bedstead knob and offered it to Barney. Still Barney shook his head, hoping that Stig would not be offended if he kept on refusing things. He had his eye on a pile of skins in the corner, and Stig seemed to notice this, for he went across to it and picked up a sort of apron of rabbit skins stitched together, just like what he usually wore himself. Barney's face lit up. "Can I have that, Stig?" "Oh, thank you." He took the skins under his arm. There were a lot more skins in the pile. Barney squatted down and turned them over. There were mole skins, squirrel skins, things that looked like cat skins, and that made Barney wonder how they'd got there. Then he gave a gasp of surprise. Near the bottom was the skin of a great animal, head and all, and it was golden and spotted with black. A leopard! Barney dragged it out and goggled at it. "Gosh, Stig, did you kill this?" he asked. Stig looked at him. Barney made spearing movements at the skin, put a questioning expression on his face, and pointed to Stig. Stig grinned and shrugged his shoulders. He seemed to be willing that Barney should think he had killed a leopard, but Barney was rather suspicious. He'd seen leopard skins like this worn by soldiers in military bands, and he had seen them on floors in people's houses. Perhaps someone had just thrown this one away. It was amazing what people did throw away. You only had to look around a dump and in Stig's cave to see what sometimes people threw away really valuable stuff. Anyhow, there was a leopard skin, and Lou wanted to go to the party dressed as a leopard. Oh, or was it a puma? She ought to be quite satisfied with this leopard anyway. There were only a few patches where the hair was falling out. But would Stig want to part with it? Barney felt in his pocket. He had only spent 2 marbles so far, and he had quite a lot more. So he took 2 more out and held them to Stig, and pointed to the leopard skin. Stig looked at the marbles, looked at the skins, and looked very doubtful. Barney added another marble to the 2 in his hand. Stig still looked doubtful. Barney took 2 more marbles from his pocket. Now there were 5. Stig suddenly seemed to understand that Barney had quite a pocket full of marbles to spend. He fair held out both hands to Barney with all the fingers spread out. 10. A leopard skin cost 10 marbles, thought Barney. He hoped he had got that many. He put the first 5 marbles on the ground and counted out what was left in his pocket. 6, 7, 8, 9. There were 3 more. Here, you might as well have 'em all, said Barney, and handed over all 12. Stig had been checking the marbles on his fingers while Barney counted. When he found he had more marbles than fingers, he was delighted, and then he went to the other corner of the cave and came back with a stone axe on a wooden handle and gave it to Barney with the skin. Golly, Stig, can I have that as well? Barney was delighted. Stig, you are kind to let me have all of these things. Thank you, thank you. I've got to go now, Stig, and show Lou what I've got. We'll all be able to go to the fancy dress party now. Goodbye. And Barney, he danced out, clutching the 2 bundles of skin and the stone axe. When he got back to the house, he had an idea. He took the bundles quietly to his own room, undressed except for his underclothes, and after some struggles with a couple of safety pins, got himself dressed in the rabbit skins. He looked at himself in the mirror and scowled fiercely. But there was something missing. Bother. He had had a haircut only 2 weeks ago, and he didn't nearly have enough hair. He had another idea. He crept downstairs to the broom cupboard, and he took the head off the mop. When he tried it on his own head in front of the mirror, it looked just right. He found a way of tying it under his chin so it stayed there. He took the axe in one hand and the leopard skin in the other and crept along the passage to his sister's room. As he had expected, she was still lying on her bed with a book. He gave a whoop and he charged into the room, waving his axe. Lou jumped like a startled cat and faced Barney furiously. You're not to frighten people like that when they're not expecting it, she said angrily. I knew it was you, Barney. Oh, no, you didn't, chuckled Barney. Anyhow, I'm not Barney, I'm Stig, Stig's brother. And he did a war dance around the bedroom. Where have you been? Asked Lou more calmly. Me been hunting, said Barney. Look what I killed, and he threw the leopard skin on the floor. Lou's eyes nearly, absolutely popped out of her head. Golly, Barney, where did you get that? She said. Killed it in the wood, said Barney. No, tell me honestly, Barney, please. Well, I didn't really kill it. I was just pretending, said Barney. I got it from Stig. Oh, Stig, scoffed Lou. You and your Stig. You mean you found it in the dump? I got it from Stig, I tell you, repeated Barney. And you owe me 12 marbles. You needn't have it if you don't want it. And he snatched it away. No, please, Barney, let me have it. It's a lovely leopard skin. I'll get you some marbles next time I go into town. Come on, please, help me try it on. Between them, with the help of pins and strings, they managed to dress Lou in the leopard skin. The bare patches hardly even showed, and it didn't even really smell any more than a real leopard would. And once Lou was inside the skin, she became more like a big cat than any other leopard would have been. She wrinkled up her nose and spat. She slunk and she clawed. They hunted each other in and out of the bedrooms and along the passages, and then Lou said, Pretend I'm a tame leopard, and you're my master, and we live in this cave. And they crept under Lou's bed and curled up. Barney said, Look, Lou, about this party on Wednesday. I know where the house is, just through the woods. We needn't even ask Granny to take us. We'll just go. 1 or 2 stars had come out in the dark blue sky overhead, and there was a golden wash of sunset in the west above the dark woods. A blackbird was trying to sing his new spring voice from the elm tree. It had been the first mild day of spring, and the air was beginning to feel alive with the earth warming up and buds opening and things creeping out of their winter beds. A leopard and a Stone Age hunter, as they let themselves out of the back door, felt they couldn't possibly have stayed indoors any longer without bursting. The leopard dropped to hands and feet as soon as it reached the lawn, and the hunter said, "Oh, come on, Lou, you'll be late if you're going to crawl all the way." "I can go just as fast like this," said the leopard, and went bounding off towards the back gate. And as they let themselves into the paddock, Flash the pony pricked up his ears and snorted and went careering round the paddock in alarm and excitement. "Silly old Flash," called the leopard, "it's only me." "I thought you were a leopard," said Barney. "So did Flash. No wonder he's frightened." They made their way along the darkening tracks and footpaths. Sometimes the leopard would go ahead and leap out from behind a bush at the hunter, and sometimes the hunter would run on and lie in wait for the leopard. One time, when Barney was laying in ambush behind a hollow beech stump, Lou crept up behind him and jumped on him instead of coming along the path. And being jumped on, Barney was cross. "That's not fair," he complained. "It's my turn to do you." But Lou only laughed in her catty sort of way and went bouncing off ahead again. Barney sat down rather sulkily and let her go on. He should have had another turn, he thought. He heard Lou's footsteps dying away along the track, and then suddenly there was a snarl and roar she usually gave when she was ambushed. She sounded rather astonished this time. Then he heard Lou's voice. "Barney, it was my turn for an ambush. How did you get ahead of me so quickly?" "You know what I'm thinking, don't you?" But he hadn't gone ahead. He's still sitting here. Who's Lou talking to? And what was going on? He got up and he ran along the path between the dark thickets. He found Lou a good distance ahead, crouching down and panting. "You did make me jump that time," said Lou. "I wasn't expecting you. How did you get there so soon?" "Get where?" said Barney. "Behind the oak tree. I know it was you, all right, but I wasn't expecting you," said Lou. "I wasn't behind the oak tree. I was along the path there," said Barney. "Oh, don't be silly, Barney. I saw you with my own eyes, didn't I?" said Lou crossly. "You must have been there." "But I wasn't, I promise," Barney protested. "How could I have got there?" Lou said nothing for a moment. Then in a different voice she said, "I think we'd better stop playing this game. We'll only be late for the party. Let's just walk on." They went on, side by side. The wood was really getting dark now, and as they went along by the fir plantation, the leopard and the hunter actually found themselves holding hands. "You know, people say they sometimes have a feeling somebody's following them," Lou said in a voice that tried to be bright and ordinary. "What about it?" said Barney. "Oh, nothing," said Lou. "I suppose it's not far to Falcombe Greens." But Barney suddenly had an idea. Lou had seen something from behind an oak tree looking at him, and now there was a feeling of being followed. Barney thought he knew what was going on, but Lou didn't, and he laughed softly to himself. "I don't see there's anything to laugh at," snapped Lou, almost tearfully, and she stamped her foot. They came out at last into the lane, crossed over, and there was the entrance to Falcombe Greens Drive. They could see the cars parked outside the house, big ones, little ones, and lights blazed from the windows and from over the front door. Lou's eyes began to sparkle. But now Barney started to feel uncomfortable. He liked parties almost as much as Lou, but once they started, he felt shy about going up to the big door and ringing the bell. As Lou skipped up to the steps and pulled the handle, Barney took a grip on his axe and looked back amongst the shadowy drive. And yes, he was almost sure something had slipped between two rhododendron bushes. It was what he thought. Someone was lurking behind them. It was Stig. The front door opened and Mrs. Falcombe Green stood there looking a little distracted already. "Hello," she cried. "Do come in. Oh, it's the puma and the caveman. How sweet of you to come, and how realistic. She sniffed a little at the animal smell that came in with them, but there was a wail from behind her, and she had to turn round to the mass of children of all ages who were hurtling around in the big hall or standing dumbly in corridors. Oh dear, who is it behind the mask there? Lone Ranger, or is it Zorro? Please don't poke little Bo Peep with your sword, will you, dear? She's only 3 and she doesn't like it. Lou looked around excitedly at the dressed-up children. There were peasant girls and ladies from the Middle Ages, and cowboys and kings and queens and cowboys, and a spaceman who was looking rather hot already, and more cowboys and Indians and squaws, but she seemed to be the only one in a real animal skin. Barney was looking at the walls of the hall. Look at all the things on the wall, Lou, he whispered. There was hardly a square foot of wall that was not covered with trophies, heads of gazelles, and hearties, and guns, and bunches of spears, and assegas, and leather shields, racks of swords, and daggers and old guns. This is a super place, murmured Barney. I'm jolly glad we came, aren't you? Mrs. Falcon Green clapped her hands loudly. Now then, children, she called. I think we're all here, so we'll start off dancing Sir Roger de Coverley. I expect you all know it, don't you? The girls do anyway, and they can show the boys. Most of the girls began twittering with pleasure and formed themselves into line, ready to begin. But there were glum looks upon the faces of the boys, and they stood around grasping various weapons. It was going to be one of them sorts of parties, was it? Come on, boys! Line up! All pistols, tomahawks, ray guns and stone axes on the oak chest, if you please, caroled Mrs. Falcon Green as she sat down at the big grand piano. The boys lined up sheepishly, and the music began, and the girls hopped and skipped, and the boys blundered and bumped, and everyone was rather glad when the dance came to an end. Mrs. Falcon Green had got everything well organised. After the dancing, they had guessing games and acting games and sitting in a ring games, and she had just handed out pieces of paper and pencils to everyone who could write, and got one of the older girls to do Ring a Ring a Roses with the tinnies when all the lights went out. The fuses! Wailed Mrs. Falcon Green. One of you older ones, get the game going, will you? I won't be long, I hope. And she made her way into the back part of the house. Well, there was a lot of scuffling and squeaking in the dark, only lit by the flickering flames from the big fireplace. Of course, it had to be Lou who thought of something. We'll play a leopard hunt, she said. Give me 20 to get away, and all you've got to do is hunt me and put me in a cage, all right? There were shouts of agreement. Boys scrambled for the weapons in the dark. Several people counted up to 20. Everybody shouted coming, and except for a few tiny ones who stayed by the fire, everybody scattered up the stairs and along the corridors, whooping and chattering and telling each other to be quiet. Barney was one of the first up the broad staircase, and on the dark landing, moonlight came in through the leaded window and shone on a figure standing there. He was just going to say something to it when he noticed it was an empty suit of old-fashioned armour, but there was someone coming up the stairs close behind him. He saw the headdress of the Indian chief. Seen the leopard? Asked the Indian. No, said Barney. Let's go along here. They went along a corridor, and at the end there was a bare open wooden staircase going up and down. Come on up, said the Indian. They climbed the stairs that were making their feet quite a noise on the bare boards and found themselves at the top of the house. There was an unlived-in feeling up here. The Indian tried the door of the room and it opened. There was nothing but boxes and trunks in the room, and there was a big window through which the moonlight came in. That leads on to the roof, that window, said the Indian. I know, I've been there. Perhaps she's on the roof. The leopard, I mean, said Barney. Might be, said the Indian. He struggled to open the window. They both got through it, out onto the ledge with a parapet. The roof sloped up behind them. They leaned over the parapet and looked a long way down to the moonlit lawn. And there in the middle of the lawn, an animal was crouching. Barney's heart gave a bump. Although he knew he was only hunting for his sister, look, He gasped to his friend the Indian. "There it is, the leopard down there." "Crumbs!" exclaimed the Indian. "Doesn't it look real? Come on, down again, quick!" They got back in through the window, bumped through the box room, clattered down the stairs, and made for the main staircase, calling out, "Everybody outside! The leopard's in the garden! Everybody out!" Hunters who had been crawling under beds and giggling in closets and wardrobes made for the staircase too, and the big door was left open, and they all streamed out into the moonlit garden. "In the shrubbery!" shouted Barney. "Leopard's in the shrubbery! Let's drive it out!" Pirates, cowboys and shepherdesses piled into the shrubbery. Whooping and crashing, out of the corner of his eye Barney saw something bolt out of the undergrowth and into the shadow of the house. "Tally-ho!" he hallooed, and sped after it along the gravel path and around the back to past the greenhouse and into the outbuildings. He heard running feet behind. The Indian and some other hunters were on the trail too. In front of him were two big wooden gates, open and leading into the stable yard with buildings all around it. "In there!" he panted. "I saw it go!" He dashed through the gateway, and at least half a dozen others clattered in with him. "Quick, shut the gates! Don't let it out!" he heard the Indian say, and the other wooden doors banged shut behind him. But Barney stood rooted to the paving, unable to move. The other children stood behind him, were suddenly still and silent too. The boys, dressed as Indians, gave a shaky whisper, "There are two leopards." The moonlight shone clearly on the roofs of the buildings and the checkered pavings in the yard, and clearly in the moonlight, like two figures on a stage, two animal forms crouched, facing each other. Both had golden black spotted fur and long tails, but as one of the crouching beasts turned its head to glare at the hunters by the gate, its eyes flashed green and alive by the moonlight. And under the mask of the other, Barney recognised the white face of his sister. How long they had stood like that, Barney didn't know. Barney grasping his stone axe, but feeling as if he had turned to stone himself. Lou crouching there, desperately willing her whole body to turn into a real live wild beast to meet this awful peril, and the real live leopard itself, because it couldn't be anything else. Frightened by the hullabaloo, mystified by the strange beast, half human, that faced it, cornered and angry. It was like a nightmare game when nobody knew what the next move should be. And then Barney heard the Indian behind him giving him another hoarse whisper. "Two cavemen." For out of the shadows, at the far end of the yard, a figure appeared that might have been his own reflection in a mirror. Shaggy hair, rabbit skins and bare limbs. But this one carried a long spear and a glinting blade, and it was levelled at the real leopard. And suddenly Barney's limbs unfroze, and he whispered, "Stig." The leopard shifted its gaze. It shot a glance at Barney. It looked back at the unmoving Lou. It looked at the advancing Stig and gave a low growl. Its tail twitched, and it began tucking its feet under, as a cat does when it's about to charge and spring. Stig crouched too, still pointing his spear, and Barney saw that in the shadows beyond Stig was the open door of an empty stable. The leopard had decided which was its most dangerous enemy, and now kept its eyes firmly on Stig. Barney crept forward behind it. He was almost within axe reach of its twitching tail. The leopard stopped shifting its feet. Its tail lay still for an instant. The muscles were tense. It sprang, but as it sprang, Barney brought his axe down on the tip of its tail. Lou burst into life with a sudden roar. Stig threw himself sideways, and the startled and confused leopard jumped twice as high and twice as far as it had meant to, and vanished into the dark doorway of the stable. Barney hurled himself forward, slammed the lower half of the door shut, and then the upper half, and gasped, "Quick, quick, somebody bolt it! Lou and the Indian struggled with the bolts, and at last they all sank down on the paving, feeling exhausted and weak. The other children were now opening the gates of the yard, and the rest of the party was streaming in, chatting and asking questions. "Where's the leopard? Have you caught the leopard? Is the game over now?" "What do you mean it was a real leopard?" "Let's have another leopard hunt. It was super fun." "Why can't we have another leopard hunt?" "What do you mean the leopard's in the stable? Where's the leopard?" "Two leopards? Well, that's not fair. Nobody told us there was two leopards." "Why can't we see the other leopard in the stable? Let's let it out and have another hunt." And the boy in the Zorro suit was actually fumbling with the bolts and trying to open the door of the stable. Stig, who was standing there, rapped him over the knuckles with the hilt of his spear. "All right, caveman," said Zorro crossly. "I can open the door if I want to. It's not your business." But Stig turned his spear round and threatened him with the point, and Zorro retreated, saying, "No need to get nasty, is there?" Then suddenly, all of the windows of the house blazed into light again, and the voice of Mrs. Forkham Green came from the front steps, calling, "Children! Children! You're all to come in at once. Everyone inside, as quick as ever you can." She sounded as if she was almost frightened of something. And as they all trooped round to the front entrance, they noticed a big truck in the drive, and strange men standing around, and some of the men had rifles. Mrs. Forkham Green was standing on the steps, flapping her hands. "Come along, come along, come along," she said. She cried. She even screamed, "Come along! It was so naughty of you to go outside. 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5. Just go into the hall and stand while I count you all." They all stood there wide-eyed. When they were all inside, Mrs. Forkham Green slammed the door behind her, leant against it with a white face, counted the guests, then counted again, and muttered to herself, "Oh dear, how many should there be? Little Jonathan couldn't come because of measles, and there was Betty Strickenwell didn't answer." The children began to join in with helpful voices. "Where's the other caveman?" And yeah, there was supposed to be 2 cavemen. I saw them. And there's 2. "Please, please, be quiet. You'll only confuse me," moaned Mrs. Forkham Green. She turned to a strange man in a raincoat who was standing by the door. "I think they're all here, Mr. she said. "Would you like to explain?" "Sorry to spoil your party, kiddies," said the man. "I'm from Bottom's Circus, and I'm afraid one of our animals got loose from its travelling cage, and it must be somewhere around here. But don't worry, we'll soon catch him." There were all excited gasps and whistles from the children. Then Lou spoke up. "It was a leopard, wasn't it?" she said. The man looked at Lou. "Yes, girlie," he smiled, "like you, only a bit fiercer." And Barney stepped forward. "It's all right, sir," he said. "We put it in the stables. Me, Stig and Lou. We'll help you get it out if you like." Blimey, that was exciting, wasn't it? I do believe it's time for bed now. Tomorrow night we've got chapter 8, and that's called Midsummer's Night. Good night.